This is analysis based on publicly available reporting. Arctic shipping traffic is up roughly 37% over the past decade. That single data point matters more than most of the noise surrounding today's headlines. It is an indicator of pressure building quietly before most people notice it. Because when activity rises in a region, pressure follows. Economic pressure, political pressure, strategic pressure. And when pressure follows, serious states do not wait for a crisis to force their hand. They do not improvise. They do not posture. They build structure early while the costs are lower and the choices are wide. That is what Canada just did in Greenland. On February 6, 2026, Canada officially inaugurated a consulate in Nuuk, Greenland, according to multiple outlets. The act itself is straightforward. The implications are not. It is easy to frame this as a political signal aimed at Washington, especially given renewed controversy around U.S. interest in Greenland and reported remarks from an American president. That framing is tempting because it fits a familiar storyline. That context exists. It is part of the backdrop, but it is not the core of the story. The core story is that Canada is locking in Arctic presence, not symbolically, not rhetorically, but structurally. And structural moves are the ones that continue shaping outcomes long after individual headlines fade, long after public attention shifts, long after individual leaders are replaced. To understand why this matters, three things need to be clear early. First, what actually changed on the ground with this consulate opening? Second, why the Arctic is no longer treated as a distant frontier. Third, why presence itself functions as leverage, quietly and consistently. When those pieces line up, the move stops looking provocative. It starts looking deliberate. And it starts looking familiar to anyone who studies how states protect long-term interests. What happened in Nuuk is easy to underestimate. On paper, opening a consulate can sound procedural. Governments do paperwork all the time. Buildings open, plaques get unveiled, flags get raised. This was not that. The level of representation sent to Nuuk elevated the event well beyond routine administration. That level of visibility is never accidental. It signals priority, it signals intent, and it signals duration. Local partners welcomed the move publicly and framed it as cooperation and support. Those statements matter because diplomacy does not operate only through private channels. In strategically sensitive regions, what is visible often carries as much weight as what is negotiated quietly. A clear boundary matters here. A consulate does not solve Arctic security. It does not freeze geopolitics in place. It does not guarantee alignment forever. But it does something more durable than a statement. It creates an ongoing platform. People on the ground, regular contact, institutional routines, practical familiarity. And over time, those routines change behavior. They make cooperation easier. They make reversals slower. They make sudden pressure less effective. That is the difference between a gesture and a structural decision. For decades, the Arctic was treated as distant and marginal. Ice, cold, inhospitable terrain. Out of sight, out of mind. That is not how strategists see it anymore. They see access to routes, access to positioning, access to future options that may not be fully usable yet, but are becoming more relevant over time. One of the clearest indicators of that shift is shipping activity. According to Arctic governance reporting, the number of unique ships entering regulated Arctic waters increased by about 37% between 2013 and 2023. That figure does not mean the Arctic has suddenly become a year-round superhighway. Conditions remain difficult, costs remain high, risks remain real. But trends matter more than headlines. Trends tell you where pressure will accumulate next. More ships mean more economic interest. More interest means more governance stress. More stress means more incentive for powerful actors to test assumptions and arrangements. That is why Arctic states talk less about symbolism and more about presence. Not because they want confrontation, but because predictability in regions like this has to be built deliberately. The resources conversation is where analysis often goes wrong, so discipline matters here. At a global level, critical minerals are central to modern industrial and defense supply chains. That is well established. It shapes long-term planning across multiple governments. That reality influences how states think about resilience. It influences how they think about future access. It influences where attention flows, even before extraction is viable. But interest does not equal inevitability. Potential does not equal production. And discussion does not equal control. Arctic resource prospects face technical constraints. They face environmental constraints. They face political and social constraints. Those constraints do not disappear simply because attention increases. So the correct framing remains careful. Critical minerals matter globally. Arctic regions are discussed in that context, but outcomes are uncertain and long-term. Even with those limits, the strategic logic still holds. When regions attract sustained attention, states that care about sovereignty and governance invest in durable presence early, not to exploit, not to dominate, but to stabilize conditions before they harden. This is where leverage is often misunderstood. A consulate is not leverage because it sends a message. It is leverage because it changes how interaction happens over time. Diplomatic infrastructure creates systems, staffing, expertise, continuous information flow, routine coordination, institutional memory. Those systems are sticky. They do not vanish overnight. They do not respond to moods. And over time, they alter the cost structure of pressure tactics. Pressure works best when uncertainty is high and targets are isolated. Visible coordination alters that environment. It does not eliminate pressure, but it narrows the room for it. This is how middle powers protect room to maneuver. They make issues harder to handle one-on-one. They widen the circle of involvement. They raise the baseline cost of coercion. Notice what this approach avoids. It avoids rhetorical escalation. It avoids threats. It avoids performative confrontation. It builds quietly, and then it holds. That is design, not accident. The U.S. context explains why this story is receiving attention now. Political controversy and public remarks have brought Greenland back into public view. But turning analysis into personality psychology is a mistake. It distracts from structure. We cannot know what any individual leader thinks. We do not need to. We do not benefit from pretending we do. What we can observe is behavior. When major powers signal interest in strategic regions, other states respond by increasing clarity, coordination, and presence. That response is rational. It is standard, and it does not require panic or overreaction. Seen that way, this move is not a reaction to a person. It is a response to conditions. Conditions in which Arctic regions are more active, more visible, and more strategically relevant than they were a decade ago. In the Arctic, sovereignty is not just legal language. It is practice. Who shows up? Who coordinates? Who invests in relationships? Who stays when attention fades? Small populations in large strategic spaces have always attracted outside interest. That is precisely why visible partnership matters. By establishing official presence in Nuuk, Canada reinforces a broader message shared with Arctic partners. Governance and sovereignty are not abstract principles. They are active arrangements maintained over time. This does not end contestation. Nothing does, but it raises the cost of treating the region as a bargaining chip. And when cost goes up, pressure becomes more expensive. That is the point. Return again to the shipping trend. A 37% increase in activity is not just about opportunity. It is about governance pressure. More traffic means more rescue coordination, more environmental risk, more need for rules, communication, and trust. That is where diplomatic presence quietly supports security, not through force, but through predictability and preparation. Institutions exist for this reason, and once built, they shape behavior without constant assertion. So draw the boundary clearly. This move signals priority. It deepens relationships. It makes coordination easier. It reinforces multilateral handling of Arctic issues. It does not guarantee unity. It does not eliminate strategic interest. It does not solve everything. And it does not lock outcomes forever. The point is leverage. And leverage comes from structure, partners, and options. Zoom out further. In a more coercive international environment, middle powers respond with engineering. They add channels. They build presence. They reduce isolation before it becomes a vulnerability. These are structural moves. They outlast election cycles. They create continuity. That continuity is strength. So this consulate should be read as early positioning, calm, deliberate, durable. Not to provoke, to endure. What matters next is follow-through, staffing, sustained engagement, practical cooperation, public alignment without escalation. If those continue, the strategy is working. This was not a one-day message. It was not designed for applause. It is a piece of architecture. And architecture, over time, changes the math. If you value analysis that focuses on structure rather than slogans, stay engaged with work like this. Share it with someone who prefers clarity over noise. And keep paying attention, because the conditions that made this move necessary are not going away.